today, but we do have Doctors Esmat and Dr. Imad here with us. So before we jump in, if I may, let me make a couple of quick editorial comments, or I guess disciplinary comments. The one thing that struck me as I read the book was that urban governance is curiously left out or underrated in the policy studies field, maybe less so in the US. I think for a variety of reasons, there may be more attention to that area within the US field of policy studies. But I think in most of Europe and Asia, it doesn't get the kind of attention that it deserves. And secondly, and this may be a reason for the first observation, it's remarkably interdisciplinary. So, as the editors point out in the abstract, this book will be an important asset for students and researchers studying law, engineering, political science, international relations, geopolitics, economics, and engineering. So that's a lot of different fields, and they're actually all reflected pretty much in this extraordinary collection, which consists of 11 chapters divided into 3 sections. The 3 sections have to do with smart cities and citizens, smart cities and governance, and smart cities and the law. So I think it's great to have this opportunity to talk to experts in the field to bring urban studies, smart cities back into the center of thinking about policy studies, and also to see this marshaling of various disciplines around this issue, which I think has to be done because it covers so many different areas. So with that somewhat lengthy introduction, forgive me, let's get right into the discussion. So I think the first basic question, particularly for people that aren't familiar with the field, is what are we talking about? What is a smart city? And you could perhaps give us some examples, and these are discussed in the book, of course, in different chapters. What are the elements or the ingredients of being smart? Can you be semi-smart? Can you be very smart? Is it a continuum? Is it a binary? How are the different elements of technology, et cetera, engaged in this? If you step back and you introduction to the concept, that was very helpful. So I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Esmat to begin with that answer.
Thank you for being here with you today. So let's begin with what a smart city is not. It is not simply a city with apps, with sensors, with Wi-Fi that deploy digital dashboards, public relations. So a smart city is better understood as an urban governance system that integrates digital infrastructure, data analytics, and institutional coordination in order to improve the decision-making, service delivery, and sustainability, ideally in ways that are accountable and inclusive. So if we want a concrete example, cities like Amsterdam or Seoul are often cited, not because they use technology, but because they attempt to institutionalize digital governance through policy frameworks, through data standards, and citizen participation mechanism. Amsterdam and Seoul, actually. So in terms of the ingredients of smartness, let's say, the core ingredient typically include, of course, the digital infrastructure, connectivity, sensors, platform, data integration and analytics capacity, as well as institutional coordination across agencies, also governance frameworks for privacy and accountability, as well as citizen engagement mechanism and sustainability alignment. But there is the key point. Smartness is not binary. It is indeed a continuum. A city can be digitally equipped, but poorly governed. It could be technologically advanced, but socially exclusive. It could be institutionally coordinated, but technologically modest. So technology adoption alone does not move a city linearly toward smarter. Governance maturity matters just as much. So now let me address, you mentioned some domains like to the smart city. Like if we talk about IoT, which is the Internet of Things, like in a smart city context, IoT means sensors embedded in infrastructure in order traffic lights, water systems, and waste bins. It's also real-time monitoring of energy, of consumption, of air quality, as well as more like systems that share data across departments. But the policy question here is not, do we have sensors? It's more like who owns the data, who integrates the data, and who secures it. So IoT without, let's say, a governance simply producing fragmented, will be producing fragmented data silos. The AI could also be used in traffic optimization, in predictive maintenance, in fraud detection, in public service
Mhm.
targeting, automated decision systems. However, AI introduces algorithm and bias risk. And a city becomes smart not when it uses AI, but when it builds transparency mechanism, auditability, fairness, the guards, and also abuse processes. Same as for other, when we talk about energy, sustainability, for example, smart cities mean data-driven emission monitoring, or urban heat planning, or even circular tracking, water pricing, integrated climate dashboards. However, sustainability must move beyond efficiency to long-term ecological governance. So many cities deploy sustainability technologies, but fail to integrate them into land use planning or into housing policy or into transportation systems. So a truly smart city aligns digital tools with climate commitments, for example, and institutional reforms.
But let me jump in. I mean, from a citizen's point of view,
Yeah.
how is living in a smart city different from living in a not smart city? Like I get up in the morning and I'm living in a smart city, and I go through my day. How is it different for me as a citizen? What do I see that's different, and what are my experiences different on a day-to-day
What you
basis and
be
practical experiences?
Actually, this is a very important question. There is not enough research to cover the public perception of smart city. Like
Mm,
exactly the question you're asking, does it mean to live in a smart city? What is going to add to your life? It should be improve the quality of life. It should be like more safe,
mm.
safe context, let's say, safe space. It should be surveillance, of course, is there. They justify it for safety. Also, smart mobility, smart.
Esmat, let me give an example here, if that makes things more concrete. If I can interject, I give an example here on
Yeah,
this.
sure.
Uh, let's take the example of a household. This is something that we're doing now, discussing in a project in the Netherlands, AI for energy. We are investing in a situation where we're trying to understand how AI could be used for smart grids in a way that helps understanding household energy consumption. That requires installing digital monitoring data, digital devices within households, and that household feeds data to the DSOs, and then for DSOs to the household itself. That double feeding would create a situation where that citizen is aware of the data that the amount of electricity or energy consumption they are doing within that household, which would on one hand create awareness that they need either to increase energy efficiency or maybe sometimes decrease it if not actually invest in consuming a lot. At the same time, that would create situation for the DSOs where they would provide incentives for increasing or decreasing energy efficiency. And that was very important in the Netherlands because with tax incentives, a lot of households, I would say more at 20 to 25%, have already installed which already feed into the system in terms of energy. And that led to a situation where they had to install energy storage technologies like batteries to store energy to then introduce to the grid based on the situation. So that created awareness in a way of how you could be more sustainable based on the digital and the system that is in place where you could read and see the data within each household. And that's reflected on both sides, be it on the DSO or the household itself. And both pushed both parties to try to figure out better how to take this further. And that's just one example. We're also trying to understand better the data center situation, how to use solar panels to increase energy efficiency within data centers while trying to understand the whole, this is another Pandora box we're dealing with at this stage in terms of how do we integrate data centers within the city where citizens are allowed to use it in a certain way that doesn't reflect its environmental costs. But that's just the first example. That's the closest thing we had into our mind. And recently, we just got awarded 4 million euros project just to discuss the further integration of AI into the energy sector. Just on that, in the context of
Okay.
yes.
Okay. I'll come back to that. But I mean, what I'm picking up from Imad's intervention is at least one element of a smart city is that the citizens are also, there's some transparency, right? That the citizens see some of that data, that it's not just data collected, gathered, sequestered, and used by the bureaucratic apparatus within the city or the state. Okay. All right. Okay, I think that's good. That gives us a benchmark. So let me move to another sort of second conceptual framing question, just so that we're all on the same page on this. How has the concept of the smart city evolved over the last decades? I'm getting the sense, I got the sense in reading your book that you're pushing the envelope, and we'll get back to this in terms of some of the elements that you're elaborating within the text. But can you give us a kind of potted history of the concept of smart cities? Where did it come from, and where is it currently at?
Imad?
Yes. So initially, infrastructure. We went from having infrastructure in a city in terms of development of technologies toward this, which created, you would say, the roots for the earliest smart city ideas in terms of thinking as initiated out. And then the concept shifted toward more integrated urban systems where data institutions and services, and then the technological evolution based on tech, people and governance, and systems thinking, based on which we moved to more where we said, okay, we have this cities where we're trying to integrate people, AI. What is missing? It turns out it was inclusion, participation, accountability, and trust. But then, in the whole, how do we sell this package, especially that you had different projects isolated? So how do we get to a point of governance maturity? And then reality showed we had pilots taking place at different places. That's already examples in the Netherlands where you had entire neighborhoods where you had decentralized energy communities being built together. Some areas even became touristic. We have this community called Vrintjef community in the east of the Netherlands, where people come and pay actual money to visit this sort of a smart neighborhood to check out this old smart sewer system slash they have their own funding. They have their own system in place with solar panels, batteries. They funded themselves, and you actually come and pay money to visit and check out how they did this. And they get you inside the house, and they offer you nice. That's the first. I mean, that could be the future of tourism. I don't know, but it was fun to see.
Yeah.
But then you end up into different questions about coordination. I mean, that opens another Pandora. But again, there's, what they say, power corrupts. So if you centralize that into a way to one place going up, then you get to questions. Okay, how do we coordinate this? What about interoperability? All right. What about rules? Privacy? Can we actually deal with privacy? Who owns what? On what basis? So this is where we are right now. And the final thing is there a one size fits all? That's probably not the case. It has to be more context specific. But this is where the book comes in because we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. You have developing countries approach. I'm assuming we're still even scratching the surface. We have examples from developing countries, developed countries, but even then, we need much more research to understand where do we go from this?
Hmm. Just a question occurred to me as a follow-up. I mean, do you have any rough idea of how many smart cities there are in the world, or is cities the way to think about this? I mean, Imad just mentioned this particular neighborhood, right? It sounded like a community, not a city. Like when I think of smart cities, I think Amsterdam, Seoul, Tokyo. You're thinking big agglomerations, urban agglomerations. So. How many, is there a sense of the quantity, the number that would be designated or would qualify as smart cities in the world?
I don't have a exact number in my mind,
Yeah.
but what I was thinking while you were asking the question, now I'm gonna try to think out loud. Potentially, we need different because I mentioned the communities and these kind of smart communities, and so maybe the one solution to not having not one size fits all is to actually redefine what's a smart city from actually meaning just a city to mean
Hmm.
whatever structure in place that could be to create a smart system that allows a little bit of decentralization based
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
specific criteria and factors altogether that makes it smart, and then you connect it to the whole system. But that's just me thinking out loud right now based on the conversation we're having.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm assuming that the terminology city, smart city, it's partly
yeah,
alliterative and it may have been embedded in the early conceptualizations.
yeah.
But what you're gesturing towards, and I think Esmat as well, is that maybe we need to unpack that or disaggregate it a bit more into something that's more network oriented, maybe, smart urban networks or something, as opposed to the city idea, which seems to be more delimited, but what you're talking about is something that stretches out. I should have said this at the beginning, but the other reason that this is such an important topic is that most of the world is going to be living in urban conglomerations or urban
Yes.
environments very, very soon. I mean, over half the world, according to the different measures, is already in that situation. So the reality of human life these days is an urban reality, and understanding that is really important. Okay.
Just to add to
Go
this,
ahead,
Les,
Esmat. Yeah.
yeah, like the reason why there isn't official number to now of how many smart cities we have in the world, because until now smart city doesn't have a single global definition. Like if you Google or if you look into literature review, you will find 100 definitions of what a smart city is. So different
Mm.
organizations count different things. For example, if you look at the IMS, the Smart City Index, the very well-known one, they rank 146. We can
Hmm.
come up with a defensible answer. But mainly at least
Right.
150 to 200 in the world.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Well.
perhaps a teaser here for everybody is that our next big project between me and Dr. Asmat and
Yes.
other authors,
And
uh,
surrogate.
we're gonna try to define the criteria on what's a smart city.
Uh-huh. Perfect. Like an index. Is there such a thing,
Exactly.
like a smart city index?
Yeah,
No,
there
that's
is
what the
three
challenge
actually.
is there to do that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always thought that that was one of the best academic entrepreneurial endeavors is develop an index on something you're interested in. Whatever you're interested in, if you can develop an index, you can sell that worldwide. Wonderful, and it's useful. I don't mean to be cynical about this or ironic, but that's great. Let's build on the previous notions about the definitions and stuff. I mean, your book, the title and subtitle, "Smart Cities to Smart Societies: Moving Beyond
Yeah.
Technology." So you've got a double movement there. You want to go from city to society, and you want to go beyond technology. So unpack that for me. And I think to some extent this has been embedded in your previous remarks, but just to make your ideas behind the title more explicit.
There's analysis from include has services smart. The second is beyond technology. It means refusing the assumption more equals type of issues are government arrangement, public data management, accountability. So because without these initiatives, inequality and destroy and experience risk. So why it's important? Because many smart projects, unfortunately, succeed technically or from a technological perspective, but they fail politically and socially. And the little is a warning, and the title is actually what we choose here in terms of our title is a warning. Technological capability is not the same as legitimacy. And legitimacy is what determines actually the long run adoption, the long run trust, and real public value. So that's what I think about what we thought together about the title.
I'm gonna be provocative a bit here, and I'm gonna go against actually the title and what we thought about, and try to think about, well, yes, we're trying to go to smart societies and more moving beyond technology, but if you read recent papers, it shows you that citizens are become what's the diplomatic word to use here? Less smart because of the use of more technologies, for the lack of a better word. So if I'm curious to know, to see studies from a from psychology and from these kind of domains to understand really how is the impact of all this smart tech and all these developments on citizens awareness, because while you have citizens who are getting more and more aware, and within this kind of initiatives others are not and are being left behind. So there is potentially an aspect that is left unexplored due to scope and due to time limit in the book, which could be interesting for future studies, is how to about the actual smartness of this. For a smart society, you need smart citizens. What is exactly the percentage of citizens who are smart so that they can move towards smart society in this so-called smart world? We have no idea.
You were some noise, uh, uh, but that's keeping my mind on. But the this initiatives are but they probably relevant in the case of, as well as in a Canadian example of the so the initiative undertaken was a little bit late. Let me get to it. Yeah, the Alphabet Sidewalk Labs K-Side project in Toronto. So this was a big deal, and I remember being around in those stages when the discussions were going on between Google and the city of Toronto. And this was going on for several years. They were going to develop this particular part of Toronto that was going to be smart and have sensors everywhere, and for both transportation, mobility, environmental monitoring, garbage collection, refuse, and all the rest of it. And then the whole thing kind of collapsed. I think partly around privacy and data concerns. So I don't know if again, in your book, you don't, as far as I could tell, none of the chapters really address that particular case study as a case study of a failed initiative around smart cities. But does that case exemplify some of the issues that you're mentioning here about the difficulties of moving toward citizen inclusion and building trust with your citizens?
Imad?
I am not familiar with the case itself,
Oh, I'm
but I can pick up on the elements she mentioned on privacy and data concerns. Um, and that's a bigger problem than the smart city itself, because uh, first of all, what kind of data we're talking about? What is the limit of what is considered private data? What is considered public data? To what and which data can be fed into the system that is considered public? Okay, public data that's considered public, but what kind of private data can be fed into the system? Who owns the data? Is it the tech company? Is it the government? On what basis? How this data can be used? We already know that in many authoritarian regimes in the world where they deployed advanced software analytics and of smart tech on the streets, already they are creating the model of the model citizen, where if you make what we call citizens mistakes, points are deducted from your good citizen model, based on which at one point your driving license is revoked, and then at one point you cannot travel, and then God knows what else, because we don't want to go down that path. So the data, this conversation with tech companies, they tell the following: it's not your data, it's about you.
Yeah.
Nobody owns it. And then they, all right, you as a company, you are benefiting from my pay a certified insured providing the data, because the service providers are not for the amount of fee. Go from here at this stage, it's not clear whether the state can actually be able to do this. You have GDPR, you have the act now in place with the very efficient. Probably, to say that now companies are saying we are GDPR compliant. We have to acknowledge 1, 2, 3, 4. But then again, if you go, and that's beyond smart cities, the idea is if you go on any online platform, there is a long contract that you have to say, I press, I agree. And plenty of citizens just press, they agree to the terms and conditions with that contract without reading it. So what kind of protection a GDPR law would provide? Nothing, because you agree to the terms and conditions. What we see, one example happening really like strikingly, is in the agri-tech companies, in the agri-tech sector. You have agri-tech companies coming to the farmer, telling the farmer, I will use my advanced software analytics data to collect data about the quality of your crops. We'll give you a program. I'm gonna progress it. I'm gonna, use machine learning to get you data that improve the quality of your crops. And in exchange, you pay me a fee. Now, questions there arise: who owns the data? Is it the is it the company? Is it the farmer? Or is it the state? And then what kind of data you should have? For instance, every farmer's house is usually near the field. So do we consider the first step that the farmer will take to go on his own house as private data, and hence the company should not collect that data as private data? And who can guarantee that? And who can guarantee when you apply the GDPR, where it says citizens have a right to remove all their data and ask the company to destroy or delete the data, that the company is doing that? Who is checking compliance? Is the commission doing that? Not so sure. So that's the question is bigger than smart cities when it comes to data protection in this regard, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's a much larger question. But with respect to the specifics of smart cities, and again, many of the chapters actually in the book are referring to the dangers of privacy, the issues of data control, transparency. Come in control that you were Chinese, and of course, I think chapter nine, but the authors of Hong Jing and Xu Zheng, it's looking at political battle, and in that chapter, the quote already video surveillance monitored enhanced processing suites overseas to Johannesburg. So I guess I don't know whether it's a worthwhile way of conceptualizing the issues, but you've got a bundle of services that seem to be some more technical monitoring, like or garbage, mobility, traffic, air quality, all that stuff seems fairly unobjectionable and good. And then you've got a bundle or a bucket of technologies that seem to be more related to overseeing and managing and monitoring citizens and their movements. And that could be traffic, it could be, whether they're in a public square, their consumption, their personal consumption, there's a whole, their behaviors. So there's a package of technologies that are around that, and that seems to be the place where we get the greatest concerns. And I don't know whether it's private companies that are necessarily the ones that are involved in this, or whether it's the accumulation of these kinds of data by state authorities and their ability, like police services and efficient policing that uses these technologies. Whether those are the things that we're most concerned about. Is that a useful way of kind of disentangling or,
Yes,
or distinguishing? And most of the concerns seem to be in the latter category.
there are, you mentioned that, so the examples we mentioned here so far have been more public authority. I will introduce an example more of the private side.
Okay, okay.
In hospitals, a patient would go for a medical exam check, based on which you have all the data concerning his medical history. For now, no one else, according to consensus rules and confidentiality and potentially GDPR, can have access to this data. I think in some places already, this data is being transferred to insurance companies. Raise or this person yeah, it's a smart way the medical state.
Right.
You'd have it for more citizens to be more healthy, or for citizens to the rest. Both arguments are valid, but that's right. And I hope that processes in democracies apply and encourage or the externalities that may emanate or emerge from the things I've just mentioned, the private side or the public side. Can democratic processes and democratic countries stop governments from exploiting this to less transparency or deploying certain behavior altering models? I'm not sure how much democracy is strong enough to get to that side, because in authoritarian systems it's already a given that they will use that to strengthen the regime. That's we cannot gonna go there, but can democracy survive that?
It's an open question, definitely, because the temptations of providing services, even in democratic contexts, can, with these new technologies, can lead to what at first blush is a relatively benign kind of interventions, but can have this darker side attached to them. That actually gets me to another point about inclusion and digital divides. And you were referring to this before, and this notion of smart citizens. What happens if smart cities tend to be really more in setting aside these concerns about authoritarianism and population control for a moment? Let's assume everything is positive, but it's positive for a relatively small portion of the population. Those who are smart citizens who have access to understand and can themselves utilize the technologies and the information and the data. What are your thoughts about that digital divide component of smart cities? And
That, well, it depends on your definition of digital divide. In the past, the definition of a poor and rich was being able to either have a car or not having a car. Right now, the definition of poor or rich is being able to afford an iPhone 9 or 10, whatever the model is now, and a Galaxy that costs $100. So
Uh-huh.
in that perspective, I don't see anybody not having access to some kind of technology,
Okay.
be it as, I'm not going to use the word primitive here, but being as cheap as possible. Everybody has access to a phone. Everybody has access to a laptop. That's no longer the measure for poverty, oddly enough, which explains how far we've been in terms of human society. Uh, that said, buying a house still, that's one way to highlight whether you are on the poor or more on the rich side or the middle class family, depending on the suburb and the where you buy it. So in this regard, being part of a network where you belong to a certain category affects the kind of services that you will be provided with within that specific network. If you're buying a house in a middle class suburb where state services are there and you could afford to pay certain amount of taxes, that can afford you an ability being in a network where you benefit from a smart city application. In contrast to being in an area where you don't, it's more populated and but doesn't have the kind of services. That will define whether you could actually enjoy the benefits of a smart city or not.
Yeah, actually, the digital divide is one of the biggest things that could make or break actually issues for smart cities, because all smart city services only help people who can have access to these technologies or to these applications and use them. The digital divide can be in terms of access problem, access gap between I'm not talking only about the digital divide between people, countries in global north, global south, even within the same country, even in Canada, like access could be different from one area to another. So it could be access gap, like people do not have coverage or they cannot afford expensive devices, or it could be a skills gap, which people may have internet, but lack this digital skill or confidence to work on forms, on apps, on online payments and all of that. And could be the use benefit gap, which is even when the skill is there, some people don't really benefit because services are not designed for default users. Language barriers are there as well, disability access, older adult, low literacy. Also the power gap, who gets actually listened to in how smart systems are. The issue is, I don't know if you have heard about the UN Habitat, they have issued, you remember, Dr. Les, the
Yeah,
approach was
yeah.
to have this, the launch, to be for the UN Habitat guidelines for people-centered smart cities. And they call for like including increasing public participation in decision-making, in deciding about the future of the city, what could be invested in, what not invested in, what will improve the quality of life, what will not improve, and all of these decisions. But they forgot that we have like 4 or 5 billion people over the world who do not have access to technology or to Wi-Fi. So how would these, when you talk about smart, like people-centered smart cities, how would this be a smart citizens then? So this is actually a very important point to take into consideration because there's still billions of people who really do not have access to the technology or even to the Wi-Fi. So a smart city is only trust if the people with the least access still get better services, not worse. That's how you
Yeah.
can trust smart city.
Forgive me if this is a bit of an extrapolation from your points, but I've got this image in my mind almost of a sort of a science fiction image of sometime in the future, you have the small number of truly smart cities where there isn't much of a digital divide at all. The people living in them are all have access to the technology. They're all relatively educated.
Misconception.
There may be some income divides. There may be some income divides, like as Imad was saying, some people live in bigger, better houses than others. But from a smart technological point of view, this is a gleaming city on the hill. It's totally modern and smart. But outside of these urban agglomerations, which may have, millions of citizens, and they have the capacity and the resources to develop all of these smart services. Outside of that, you may have in the quote rural or non-smart areas with smaller communities that don't have the same resources. They may be the ones that, so the divide may end up being somewhat more spatial than income based or within the same spatial location within a city, for example. I'm at the moment in a very small fishing village, about 5 hours drive from Madrid. It's on the coast of the Mediterranean, and the water has been going out over the last couple of days. Like and people were telling me that the water mains have broken, and so I could imagine a future world where you've got these small remote communities where things kind of break down and they're not particularly smart, whereas the capital cities or the large urban conglomerations are the ones where this technology is really concentrated and fully functional. So maybe that's the kind of divide that we'll have in the future, more spatial rather than within the same location. I'm kind of a crazy idea, but
No, but there's
go
also
ahead.
the internal divide. So when I mentioned the neighborhoods, the quality of smart city services that you get as a citizen depends on the quality of the neighborhood that you're in.
Okay. Oh, even within the same city.
Yes. So if you're
Okay.
living a middle class family in a nice neighborhood, that significantly increases your chances of getting great smart city applications in contrast to living in a less fortunate neighborhood with other problems where maybe establishing monitoring devices to monitor water quality much more maybe less incentivized, more risky. Who knows what are the factors that play around there,
Right.
resulting in
Right.
a situation where you have the kind of internal divide within the same city. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
the word network, because the kind of network you're in
Yeah.
that affects the kind of smart city applications you get, resulting in a smart city divide. So even everybody has access to smart city, I will call them gadgets, but
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm-hmm.
people have access to more expensive gadgets.
Okay. So it could still be that kind of divide that we see even internal to cities themselves. We've only got about 10 minutes left. I do want to leave 1 or 2 minutes at the end for some questions from some people that have joined us. But let me shift the focus from the local community to kind of the global and the international. Something I think most of our audience might not know, and I certainly didn't before I read the book, is that there's an extraordinary array of international organizations that are involved in global networks around smart city standards. And just the list as I compiled them through the various chapters that I was reading, there's C40 Cities, Smart Cities Network, United for Smart Cities, Sustainable Cities, Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, United Cities and Local Governments, Local Governments for Sustainability, World Smart Sustainable Cities Organization, the Group of 20 Global Smart Cities Alliance. So it looks like and the habitat that Dr. Esmat was mentioning before, looks like there's a lot of activity at the global level with these different networks and such. Can you comment a little bit on the nature of these global networks and standard setting and what is happening globally through these networks and what their contribution is and where the gaps are, I guess?
Yeah, Imad, please.
Yes, that's the initial efforts made towards creating binding frameworks, binding regulations at the global level in terms of smart cities. That's how the process starts. So all these standards or initiatives or efforts are voluntary at this stage. They are soft. You consider them part of soft law. So they're trying to define what counts as good elements of a smart city. Some of them emphasize on climate leadership and sustainability performance. Others focus more on even on digital rights or in governance toolkits. So even within these initiatives, you could already see ideological divide as what is considered as a smart city. And we go back to the same conversation. What do we focus more on, digital or sustainable? What is sustainability here? What do we mean by digital? And where is governance? Should we have a new framework for this? That would be interesting. Then they try to discuss the idea of language. Okay, what kind of language? In terms of language harmonization, in terms of shared indicators, what is the concept here? How do we report? How do we measure? What's the benchmark? So all of these elements they're trying, and this is still scratching the surface. And then the final one is about procurement and policy diffusion. What kind of contracts? What are the data governance rules? Platform choices for that? How standards travel? How does enforcement work? All of these, we're still at the beginning. This is why we're again in front of the same phenomenon of fragmentation of this conversation in terms of what matters, what doesn't matter. I just hope we are not getting to a point later on of overinflation of regulation, trying to overregulate a new topic, ending up creating dysfunction. But at this stage, this is needed to try to understand. But we don't want to go from trying to understand to complete control. That's what happens in many fields, including the internet. So we will see how this will go. And we will understand, we will also have to see later on there's of competing visions. The same way we have AI race, different visions, different standards. We will probably have smart city race between different countries who has the better model of smart city ecosystem, let's say, and who has global smart city leadership, the same way the EU has global AI leadership, at least legally. So we don't know yet who's going to lead in that. You could see already maybe Singapore will come out of this because they're already doing a lot of work on this, especially with their fintech approach and fintech investments. Just today I had a conversation about, weirdly enough, about how the European Commission was considering trying to learn from the models developed in Singapore in terms of regulatory sandboxes to try to use that and adopt it within the European ecosystem concerning the deployment of AI, because they're developing all these ELSA labs emerging for AI, energy, but smart technologies for manufacturing. And weirdly enough, Singapore was on the list of trying to learn from them in terms of fintech regulatory sandboxes. So that could be a way forward for new countries as well to establish leadership in terms of developing countries. But at this stage, we are still scratching the surface.
Well, that actually leads to maybe my last question, and then we'll open it briefly for a couple of minutes in case other people have questions. And that's the Global South. I mean, you're mentioning already Singapore and these different models coming up from different geographical players. But in your concluding chapter, I'll just quote you a section from the concluding chapter. New frameworks may need to be developed for smart city implementation in the Global South, drawing on recent data and research that can also benefit developed nations. So, a lot of the chapters in the book refer to the developments in the Global South, particularly in the Gulf. We have NEOM, and if you want to include Singapore in the Global South, we've got Singapore, there was South Korea, a range of different examples. So is there something, is there an emerging leadership in the Global South? Are there models coming out of the Global South that for a change are going to be leading this discussion as opposed to always looking to Europe and North America? What are your thoughts on the role and the nature and the contributions of the Global South, to use that very broad category?
Well, just to clarify, Les, when we say in our book, we need new frameworks for the Global South, we're not saying that the South need to catch up. We're just saying that the assumption built into many smart city models in terms of capacity, in terms of formality, institutions, trust, and infrastructure don't travel cleanly, actually. So three, let's say, practical reasons. First one is the different baseline conditions in terms that in many contexts in the Global South, service delivery challenges are more fundamental, and the risk is that smart systems optimize around exclusion rather than reducing it. The second one, which is different governance realities, where oversight is weaker, the same technologies become higher risk. So surveillance and control are not edge cases. They can become the default political issue, the political use. So also informality is always central, not marginal. So the book's discussion of platform urbanism and let's say informal cities points to something important. Smart often arrives through platforms before public institutions are ready, which changes who governs the city in practice. So the new model actually, I think, copy Barcelona. It's just from context and build governance, build follow inclusion, and build rights protection. So as first order design requirements for smart city. Now, Imad, do you want to add about the Global South leading?
In this regard, every country will have its own model because there is no one size fits all. One example, for instance, that could work, and we will see if that could work, what was termed in Qatar as the desert economy, based on which you install solar panels in Qatar in the desert, you create a touristic sightseeing, people go there, and then you finance, and then you shift from oil towards complete renewable energy generation slash you build the whole system based on that. That would create a situation where Doha would become smarter. I'm using the word smarter here, but that could be that then people would argue that a smart city is based on a smart economy or a desert economy. You'll see papers coming desert economy as a way to achieving smart city. So it will depend on different approaches to different countries, essentially building with what they have as local context, expertise, and factors. That could be in Qatar, that will work on desert economy. In Singapore, it's based on their own leadership style, which led them to where it led them. I'm assuming in places in China, there will be something different as well. I have absolutely no idea about India. That would be another case to discover. Or what would be Latin American city. I know in Latin America, there is the city in Argentina. They created these Bitcoin. This wasn't Bitcoin, but sort of a coin that I think it was on blockchain for trading with water in the city. And then they tried, and then that was put on a bidding for public authorities, they tried to invest and get investors to invest in this coin to ensure to sort of create a value for the water in that city. I don't remember the name of the city, but it didn't work out. They could not get the bidding on, but that could be some sort of a Latin American model. I believe we'll get to a point where we have different models clashing and competing on what's the best model for a smart city. And that's where the opportunity lies, because it cannot be coming from one person or one party saying this is a one size fits all. At this time, it work.
That's an important insight, I think, because the tendency of people outside the field like myself is to think of smart cities, some kind of undifferentiated, just collection of technologies and the application of services. But you're right, the different chapters had different examples of different approaches. I think there were a couple, one chapter referred to some cases from Morocco, which was organized around a green knowledge-based city, and then examples from South Korea that also had a different configuration. You mentioned, a desert approach, etc. So we're at the very end, and I know that Dr. Esmat really has to leave within about a minute or two, but we do have one question in the chat. Do you think that in the wake of smart cities, smart technologies, citizens will become mere applicants instead of entitled to certain benefits? The responsibility would shift from the state the responsibility would shift from the state to the citizens themselves. So I'm not sure. I think the first part of it is kind of picking up on the point that we were discussing earlier about population control and the actual agency that citizens would be able to exercise in the context of a smart city. So I think we've touched on that question. I think, again, given the constraints for Dr. Esmat, if you need to leave, Esmat, we could stay for another minute or two with Dr.
Sure.
Imad if there's any questions that people have. Do you need to go?
Yeah, it's okay. I can leave and Imad is with you.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you so much. Thank
Well,
you for
thank you so
having me.
much. Okay. Wonderful to hear from you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay.
Uh,
We
if I come
can,
back to the first part of the question, I could already
okay.
mention, for instance, so in the recent AI Act, the EU divides AI regulation in according to categories of risks. So you have unacceptable risk, high risk, low risk, minimum risk. And in the unacceptable risk category, you have, for instance, you cannot use AI technologies to manipulate human behavior.
Mhm.
I am assuming we will have a similar regulation where it will mention and lay out directly what are the unacceptable smart risk application practices that citizens
Mhm.
and authorities will be prohibited from using in the long term.
Good. Yeah, okay. That's an interesting approach to it would be somewhat lighter form of regulation, but it would set some basic principles. And you're right, that would hopefully forestall the worst instances of this kind of surveillance state system that we unfortunately, I think, see in some countries. I will allow, if anybody, one person has a question with Dr. Imad here with us still, we can entertain it.
Yes, I believe there is a question in the chat box.
Yeah, that's the one that we were referring to. Yeah, we just spoke to that. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, in closing, Imad, could you go come back with us to what the future direction, what future projects and research stem out of this? So the book is a wonderful compendium, but you were already mentioning a couple of initiatives and places you want to go, and where more generally the research on smart cities will be heading in the near future. What are your thoughts?
So something that bothered me after the book is, despite doing a book and reading on the literature, nobody understood or identified what are the parameters or the criteria for a smart city. And
Okay.
that is bothering me a lot. So with Dr. Asmat and other co-authors, we embarked on it since January on a project where we will first map the literature of whatever we could find, even the slightest idea of what are the criteria there in
Hmm.
terms of smart city, and then we will focus on a couple or three empirical cases and try to come up with common denominators as to what potentially could be an idea of a smart city, and then create potentially a framework based on that and try to apply it. Because we
Hmm.
get to just, okay, everybody's talking about a smart city, great, define it. I don't know what's a smart city, so what's the point?
Right, right.
So yes,
Uh, is this something similar to the idea of an index that we were discussing before?
yes, that would be
Yeah,
this idea of the index. So that is
yeah,
something that is in terms of index. The other thing is I'm getting more into more projects based, so you cannot target all the aspects of a smart city in all the time.
right.
So, for instance, one project we got in the Netherlands right now is we are trying to understand how AI affects artificial intelligence affects the energy sector. We are using three use cases. We have smart grids, we have data centers, and we have digital twins. And the next step is we're hiring a PhD candidate, one on law, one on ethics. There's a third one on engineering, where they will try to understand from a smart grids perspective how the inclusion of AI affects citizens, in the same time DSOs from data centers. Same thing with AI in terms of how do you environmental footprint of a data center and digital twins on a remote Dutch island here. That's one project that will start very soon. We're
Mhm.
just in the latest steps. Another thing, so this is a couple of things we're working on right now. You think what else we're doing on this? We are we and that this is something gonna come out in the next 10 days. We mapped the different provisions within the AI Act, along with Dr. Asmat and others, to understand whether the AI Act really covers all the environmental elements and sustainability dimension when you use AI. And what we came out to is that it focuses more on it has a human-centric approach to things. So all the environmental harm that relates directly to human are covered within the act. However, all the environmental damage are not directly related to humans are not covered with the act. and that's a problem. And so AI technology regulations cannot go this way. That's an aspect in terms of regulations. If you want to deal with a smart city, you have to cover all the elements of a smart city, not only the human approach. You have human, you have ethics, you have environmental, you have business. So,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure one regulation all the time can cover all that.
Yeah.
That's a problem. For instance, uh, we
Well,
are
terrific. Oh.
yes, many other stuff, but yes. For
I
instance,
know. Yeah.
the last thing is adaptivity. We are working on a notion of adaptivity. In terms of we're applying for a project where, because you have energy systems that are not adaptive to changes, we are getting with 5, 6 different faculties within the Netherlands to discuss the idea of adaptivity. How can energy systems adapt to changes, taking digitalization, other fields as a case studies, and how do we define adaptivity from an economic, legal, engineering perspectives, having use cases. All that in the
Mhm.
context and with the objective of reaching flexibility.
Fantastic.
And I
Fantastic.
will, and I will
Well,
stop here.
this goes. Yeah, you're a busy guy. You're going to be a busy guy, but this goes back to the opening remarks. I mean, the what I find really intriguing about this field is so interdisciplinary, so multidisciplinary. I mean, to really get traction on this is, I think you're suggesting you need to work with people in hard sciences and engineering and law and ethics and bring them all together to try to understand these developments. So, well, I wish you luck. Thank you very much for sharing your time with Dr. Esmat and your colleagues, and best wishes going forward on this work and everything related to it. It's been a great conversation, real eye opener.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and hope the reader and the everybody enjoyed that, and we'll be happy to have questions later on, follow-ups in case there are any. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
today.
well, thank you. Yeah, once again, the book is Smart Cities to Smart Societies Moving Beyond Technology, and it came out last year from Routledge. So I
Yes,
encourage everyone to pick up a copy. All right.
thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.